Welcome back to another episode of TimeOut with the Sports Doctor podcast, where life, sports, and medicine intersects. We are glad that you are part of this growing community where we strive to help you strengthen your mindset, help you grow your assets, and help you achieve whatever level of success that you want for your life. Go to our website at Dr.Derrick, thesportsdoctor.com, where you can find all the latest content, and you can also follow us on our social media channels. Now, let's get into this episode. Welcome back to another episode of Time Out with the Sports Doctor podcast, and we have a very interesting guest and topic to discuss today. We have Ms. Jennifer Jones Patulli, who is a specialist in conflict. Not only just you would think about conflict, but productive conflict. How about that? So you're in for a treat. So I first like to just introduce you to Ms. Jennifer here, and we're going to have a conversation about the creative energy of conflict. Many times we think about conflict in a negative manner, but she's here to help change our perspective on that. So welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Dr. Derrick. It's such a great pleasure to be here, and it's always fun to talk about conflict, not as something negative, but as something that can produce amazing creative potential.
Sure. So you are come highly recommended by Mariko Gordon. You know, she sent us several guests over the last couple of years, and they always bring something very special. So I can't wait to talk to you more.
Yeah. Cheers to Mariko.
Yeah. So I loved her when she came on because she talked about your relationship with money. You know, many times we talk about spending money and changing our ways of spending it, but she really dove into your relationship with money. And I thought that was very insightful for me. Just thinking about a different approach to how you spend your money and everything of that nature.
Yeah, and that's definitely something that I've really appreciated about her work. And this is where we connected, because she was teaching me about this relationship with money. And I started talking about this relationship we all have with conflict. There are patterns in the way we engage and disengage. There are patterns that we bring into how we react and how we proactively influence conflict. And I started thinking, mostly inspired by learning more about my relationship with money through Mariko, to think about what is conscious conflict and the way we spend our energy and resources in conflict? And so who decides?
Yeah, no, exactly. And, you know, one thing we talk about a lot here is your freedom, time freedom, the way that you are able to have control of your life. So I think this is going to tie in really nicely with that.
Yeah, and so much about accessing the creative potential of conflict is mindset and knowing your sense of power as well.
Yeah. So tell us your journey to getting to focus on this. It's a very niche topic. So how did you get to this?
Well, I actually, growing up in Canada, was obsessed with entrepreneurship and got a chance to work in the family business and started learning about conflict just by watching it explode and watching its impact on our bottom line, our ability to perform as a team, make money, and deliver quality to our clients and customers. And with that obsession, I just kept studying and reading. I became a trained mediator. I did my master's in conflict theory, ended up working in the federal government in Canada as an in-house mediator. And that's where I really started to bring my practice to a new level, mediating multi-stakeholder procurement disputes and also then workplace disputes and some very big files with harassment complaints and things that were just really affecting people's ability to not just work, but stay healthy in an environment that was calling on them to be their best.
Yeah. So I think if you can offer society a solution to using conflict on the job in a productive manner, that sounds priceless to me. So how did you package that when you go to like an industry or to a corporation and say, hey, I can help you make your employees more productive?
Yeah, so I do a few things. One is I coach leaders. And we all know the value of coaching because I think you've talked about it many times in your podcast and in your work. And I am also an athlete. I cycle and I have a coach that helped me really develop my craft. So I offer coaching, and specifically to leaders because I think they have just an enormous influence on the workplace, which is kind of obvious, but also the subtle forces that they bring. So alongside coaching too, supporting their whole teams. I offer training workshops. I still offer collaboration services, which is about getting teams that are either moving through challenges from conflict or challenges of moving through uncertainty, like workplace change initiatives. And I help them through different things that I offer, which is listening labs and small group sessions and facilitated dialogues, as well as also still offering mediation services like I did in government.
So when you mentioned cycling, so I think sports,
Yeah.
coaching in sports is second nature. You think about, okay, you're on a team, you have a coach, or if you're struggling in a certain sport and you want to get stronger, you hire a coach to work on
Yeah.
certain skills. But many times in the workspace, especially in medicine, coaching is almost unheard of. Life coaching is not really something that I don't think the general population is really familiar with. I'll speak personally. It was not really until COVID when I really slowed down on my job that I started hearing people talking about coaching, especially in the physician space. So let's talk about what does coaching look like, just up close and personal.
Yeah, and specifically the conflict coaching piece that I bring. So helping people use their conflict, use the conflicts in the workplace to produce greater output and greater connection. So it's everything you learn about negotiation, but not just on splitting the pie or getting the best deal. It's applied to how do we make a relationship grow? How do we make a workplace more effective? And many times in the workplace, our conflicts are signaling something that needs to be changed, whether it's a process or a team dynamic or a power dynamic or even just use of power. And many leaders need to be focused on this for their own performance. We talk about leadership development in so many ways. Conflict coaching becomes a really amazing piece of this puzzle. And we learn about our styles in so many ways. But once we figure out how a leader can then leverage conflict on their team and listen to the patterns of the conflict so that they can understand and diagnose effectively what is
Yeah.
happening in their relationships.
So as you were saying that, I wrote down conflict, listen to it. So I think many times I'll speak personally. If you have conflict, it's either like, all right, just get over it and move on, do your job, not actually let's sit down and discuss it. So is that how you start off? Is it more of a discussion about the problems that you're having and how you can not resolve them, but how that can be used to be more productive?
Absolutely. Usually the starting point is always a current conflict. And that's generally when people call me. I always encourage people to call me before that conflict too, but let's zoom into that conflict space. And once we start unpacking the dynamics and looking at it, not just for something that's exploding, but for many moving parts and probably the way that you would diagnose a patient, you're looking for so many different patterns, patterns of wellness, patterns of discomfort, patterns of disease. And all of these patterns tell you a story. And our conflicts are full of patterns that tell us a story. And so often we're told, yeah, don't listen because conflict is supposed to be a problem. And leaders shouldn't have problems. It makes them look bad, right?
Right.
And we want to get rid of those problems, solve them, put them aside. Well, what if we used it for an amazing opportunity to grow? And we think about this in our home relationships most easily, the way we are with our spouses. Like we owe it to our spouses to show up and to listen. And what are we hearing? In the patterns. So conflict has patterns. Many things might repeat. Some things might be new, but you might notice in your last 4 conflicts, something has been similar. What is it? And so starting with a conversation about a specific conflict with the leader and then moving into what patterns are you noticing? What is that telling you about your positioning, your interaction, your questions, your defensiveness, your posture, your breathing, your anxiety level, all of these things, and unlocking that allows them to just stand a little taller, stronger, and dials down the intensity so that they can be strategic again, which is their asset as a leader.
Wow. I mean, that sounds very powerful, especially as a leader when you're able to back away from the situation, collect yourself, and then actually deal with what's going on instead of just many times responding or reacting to the conflict.
Definitely. And I draw a distinction between reacting and responding. And another thing that happens in conflict is there's many opportunities where there's bait thrown at us because of emotions, because of challenge, and because of that stuck feeling we all have. And if we take the bait, we are reacting.
Mm-hmm.
If we look at the bait and see it for what it is, we can respond. We can choose what to engage and disengage with. We can say, is this a conscious use of my spending time in conflict? Am I choosing this or am I being called into it because someone else is forcing me into it? And I want to put that agency back on the leader, back on the individual. Like you're not being forced into anything. You always retain your power of agency, your power of capacity, and your power of that sense of why, that higher purpose of what you're trying to do in your life. And conflict can destabilize you, but if you choose to respond, if you choose to look at the patterns, you can then know I'm entering here because this is fitting into my value stream. It's fitting into the call to action within the realm of I'm not taking a bait. I'm driving now. I'm driving this towards something better.
So I want to use, I guess, myself kind of as a case study here, because many times when I hear conflict or a problem, my mind, I automatically go to a solution or trying to come up with a solution. And I think that might be pretty common. What's a better way to approach conflict or approach a problem just in general?
I love it. And one of the things I want to discuss is also problem versus pattern. And this is something that comes out of the complexity sciences and my work with the Human Systems Dynamics Institute. So I did that after government and my step into consultancy work. So if it's a problem, like a mechanical problem, or so I had a bad hip injury and the surgeon said, look, this is a mechanical issue.
Right.
We need to either get you a hip replacement or do the bone shaving. And it's true, it is a mechanical issue. There's also patterns around wellness. And so I need to fix the problem. If there's a problem, fix it. And usually a problem has a solution and then it's done. You never look at it again. What we notice in human dynamics is there's very rarely one problem that can be fixed.
Right. In isolation.
So, exactly. It's a system. It's a holistic way of looking at the health and wellness of your relationships. So when you start looking at patterns, you start looking at the true nature of this, and you can then influence patterns and say, what kind of relationship do I want here? How do I want this conversation to flow? What is this conflict teaching me about the quality of the current relationship and the gaps that I need to address? And maybe there are micro problems that you can fix. And sometimes it's about, well, what else can I do to shape the patterns of the future quality of this relationship? Asking deep questions, listening more, and just being in presence with people, just bearing witness to the emotions, the challenges, the stuck feeling, as well as the opportunities for joy and connection that come.
Yeah, I'd say one thing that I've noticed in the workplace many times is there's a hierarchy, right? And the people with power make the decisions, and the people who are on the lower end, many times the workers feel that they have no power or no voice. So as a leader, I mean, that's all part of conflict, resolving conflict, dealing with the conflicts that might not have a lot to do with where you are. But when you listen to people and when they are able to share their feelings, they feel more empowered, right? So is that part of productive conflict, would you say?
Absolutely. I deal a lot with power dynamics, and this is where I bring in the work of Dr. Julie Diamond, the Diamond Leadership Group. And she talks about power intelligence, and it's a concept that I teach my leaders as well, both in coaching and in workshop settings. And what that is too is just not just seeing power dynamics around you, but noticing there are different types of power. And often when I'm working in the medical sector, like it is clear, right? Doctors at the top, like nurses and support staff, and that can be felt profoundly. And I've worked on different projects where we're trying to get synergies and more collaboration, and that hierarchy really does play into what can happen and what gets discussed. At the same time, that is positional power. That's authority structure. There's also legitimacy structures. There's also informal powers. And so part of using conflict in new ways and part of seeing the productive potential of it and the patterns present is to start saying, what other powers am I noticing? There's powers of expertise. Different levels have different expertise. There's power of knowledge and know-how. There are the personal powers of that sense of agency and capability, that higher purpose that we draw on sometimes to get us through the hardest points in life. Like these are all sources of power. And if we start honoring everybody at all levels of the organization and recognizing the power they bring and not negating it because they fall lower on the org chart, we already have a better place to start a conversation. And sometimes we close our conversations because we stay too stuck in the org chart or in the hierarchy, and we forget that there are other powers that play in. And people will find them. We see this in popular uprisings and social justice. Like many people have a tremendous amount of power despite the impending forces of a structure around them. And this is precisely how we create change.
Yeah, I like that. And I think that many times we're thinking one solution, right? And not that there's many different ways to attack it, many different variations of a solution, but we just one simple solution, check the box and move on. As healthcare providers, we spend a large portion of our lives focused on our training as well as taking care of other individuals. But I'm calling a timeout because life can change in an instant. We know it's difficult to fathom that a sudden illness, injury, or death could put you and your family in a devastating financial situation. But that's where Dr. Stephanie Pearson and her unique team of advisors at Pearson Ravitz come into play. They focus on empowering physicians like yourself to protect your most valuable asset, your income, and life's most important people, your family. So go to pearsonravitz.com to make sure that you are protected today.
And if it was like a problem with a solution, then we would check it, we'd move on, it would never come back. And what we see in human dynamics and in conflict, and this is particularly why I say to people, think about the last four, because some things just don't stay fixed in time. Humans defy that linear, movement, and it's more messy. So we need to look at more types of actions, and solutions come in small packages and they come also in iterations. So we'll take some action in a negotiation, in a conflict, and then we wait and get feedback. This is the productive angle as well, right? This is what we do is we iterate. So you're building and building, and in our marriages, we build and build over time. We listen in new ways. We choose to speak or not speak. We hear a conflict over and over again, and we're like, well, what is new here? How do I draw that out? How do we both draw that out together? How do we support each other when we feel stuck? And in the workplace, that gets a little bit more challenging because sometimes you don't have that long durational component or that commitment. And people come and go, and it gets a little bit more complex with different languages and value streams and different ways of connecting and disconnecting. But there's so much there.
So you mentioned the last four twice now. So let's dive into that. Define for us exactly what the last four is. How do we identify, hey, this is number one, this is number two, number three, number four. Let's define how you identify that and then how you will apply it.
Yeah, and this is just me doing pattern spotting with my coaching clients. I always ask people, think about the last four conflicts you've been in. And instantly, you'll notice some similarities, some things that repeat. Perhaps it's what somebody yelled at you, right? And said like, you're not listening, which is a very common one, right? We often forget to listen, especially when we're busy, especially when things are moving fast, and especially when we know there's a solution. Like smart people fall into this trap all the time. Like they can see through the problem, they know what to do, but that comes with a layer of assumption around. And you might be right, but if you are wrong and you haven't listened, you haven't prepared for that variable. And all I say to leaders is, so last four conflicts, one example is you're not listening, come up in the last four conflicts, signal, I might be moving too much into my expertise and maybe too much into my sense of knowing and not so much into the moment where people are trying to tell me something that maybe I know, but maybe I don't. And I need to stay curious here and I need to open up a bit. Also in your last four conflicts, you'll see some differences, right? Like maybe this person said that and the other person said this. And those differences you'll begin to assess like, is there weight in this coming up now? How do I look at that versus this? And start playing that game. And so last four conflicts is an exercise in getting people thinking about the patterns in their relationship and how they factor in. Maybe in the last four relationship conflicts or workplace conflicts, you've been very defensive. And that could signal close to burnout. And often I work with leaders and they've been doing such good work. And a lot of public servants that are doing a lot of work and not really getting recognized and they're burning out, especially people in the health sector as well.
So I was thinking, when you deal with leaders, many times you're dealing with type A personalities, you're dealing with people who have been right and used to being right. And now you're coming in saying, hey, you have to approach the way you deal with people differently, or there's a better, not maybe a better way, but a different way. Are you usually met with a guarded, this is how we do it, this is how we've always done it? Or do people usually relax and listen and just kind of open up? What do you usually encounter?
I get both. And really it depends on whether they've reached out for me directly or they've been mandated to reach out to me. And that's definitely where the resistance comes from. And that goes back to a sense of power too. Like when you're told to go see the conflict management specialist versus choosing yourself, it's a different energy stream you're bringing in, different mindset. And usually I just give them time and I try to really listen to them and model some of the ways that open up a conversation. And, intro calls really help to get to know, because sometimes also maybe it's not the right time. And I often think about and try to teach people ripeness in conflict. And sometimes we enter into conflict because it's exploding in front of us. Sometimes we put it off because we don't have time. But there is a ripeness. There is a time to enter into conflict that's mostful for productivity. Sometimes we miss it because we waited too long. The conflict avoidance, when overused, will lead to that. And sometimes we blow up way too fast and we miss an opportunity for a conversation that could have been very generative.
And do you also deal like one-on-one with clients from internal conflict or personal conflict, things that you've gone through, traumatic situations? Does it also apply to that?
It does. And usually it opens up a lot of different questions. And I always have to be very careful about the boundaries of my work. I'm not a psychologist, and I don't go into deep memories and histories of trauma. At the same time, conflicts can mirror some of that energy, some of that experience. And sometimes the conflicts you're facing will show you, oh, this is something that's been happening in my life since I was small. And many people will tell me, my first experience with conflict was with an abusive parent. And we learn at those ages, and this is part of what we bring into the workplace. And facing that and the bravery that each person has to face that is tremendous. I offer support, and then also I try to help people find the right supports if they want to go deeper down those roads too. It can bring up a lot, and also it can provide pathways that are actually very actionable too. And sometimes just living out some things with less of an adrenaline rush and with less of a heart rate hike can actually change some of those experiences so that the early traumas and situations that hold us back might no longer hold us back.
Yeah. So I think that a lot of the things that we're talking about in these concepts are going to be relatively new to many people that are listening. What resources or books would you recommend? One or two books, maybe, or resources to go to learn more about productive conflict?
Well, I always invite people to check out my website, and I write a lot of blogs and I do podcasts, and I try to provide as much intro material as I can in those settings. I also have a lot of favorite authors, and I read a lot, and I could give you an endless book list. I think that might be better if I follow
Okay.
up after with that, because that'll
Sure,
be a little
sure.
bit, I love reading, and I just like, there's just so many amazing people out there. And a lot of times I just find this amazing work and I just give references to my clients for what to read next. I always invite people to just join me for a 25-minute chat, get to know me, ask your questions directly, because there are some generalities about learning about conflict as a creative force. And I started learning about them through the work of Mary Parker Follett, who was a management theorist from the early 20th century. Not everyone wants to go that nerdy, and maybe wants something a little bit more 21st century. So again, I'll follow up. But yeah, I think talking about it and finding the specificity that each person is looking for is really helpful. And just first and foremost, notice around you. Notice what's coming up for you. Notice what you're engaging and disengaging from. Notice the patterns, and you'll find a lot of wisdom just in your experience of conflict. And I would wager that people know more than they realize.
Yeah.
Just get out of default mode and into conscious,
So
productive conflict
that's one
mode.
thing I was going to just bring up. Like you said, get out of default mode and really get into your conscious state, be present. Introspection, I think, would be key with
Yes.
dealing with this, especially on a personal level. Be true to yourself. Okay, I know I'm struggling with this. I know that I need help in this arena, and I want to get help before somebody sends Jennifer to my office, right?
Yeah. Or just call me because you want to learn something new, right?
Sure,
It's just,
sure.
it doesn't have to be a after action thing. It can be a proactive thing. And that's what I love about leadership development work and the training workshops I offer. I try to encourage people like, this is a wonderful space to just learn. It doesn't have to start with a crisis. It doesn't have to start with a conflict. And you'll find a lot more safety in those places with these conversations.
Yeah. So on Time Out with the Sports Doctor, this is your final timeout. So we've talked about a lot of different ways of how to use productive conflict and from a creative standpoint. But where do people start? Somebody might be saying, wow, this is me. I really need this help. But I'm a little, if I put myself out there, I might look like a weak boss, or it might expose some things that I know I've been struggling with. So how do you ease someone's mind about that?
Well, first, I would let them know there's strength in asking questions. You are never weak if you're brave enough to face patterns and conflict and the hardest moments. You are probably among the top strong people in this world. So cheers to that. And second is just, a conversation, a confidential, private conversation is the safest way to start learning. And sometimes it's entrusted people in your social circle already that you might not have reached out to in this way. And sometimes it's people that are farther away that can provide assistance. But reaching out is just another strong, wonderful act.
Yeah. And this might be a reason why they need to come to the beautiful island of Hawaii, right?
It's definitely a place to come visit.
Yeah. What island are you on?
I'm on the island of Kauai.
Kauai. Oh, Kauai
Yeah.
is beautiful. Yeah.
It is. It's a special place.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you for coming on. Tell people how they can follow the work that you're doing. We'll include your information in the show notes, but just tell them here, and then I know we'll get that information on books and resources as well.
Definitely. My website, productiveconflict.us. You can follow me on LinkedIn, either under my name, Jennifer Jones Patulli, or under Productive Conflict. And then on Instagram, Productive Conflict as well.
Well, thank you very much for coming on. You brought a wealth of knowledge here and gave us really many things to kind of look into more from a personal standpoint and from a professional standpoint. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Derrick. I appreciate your time.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you for continuing to support this podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, then please leave a 5-star review. And if you haven't done so, subscribe so you continue to get the updated episodes. Until later, peace.
Hey, time out with the sports doctor. Keep our head right in the game. We ain't never stopping. You are now tuned in. Trust you don't want to miss. This is where life, sports, and medicine.